My name is David. I'm 57 years old, and I never imagined I would find myself here, writing something like this for strangers to read. I'm a private person by nature, but I have to get this story out from inside of me. It has been sitting in my chest for weeks now, a solid, heavy weight that presses down on me from the moment I wake up until I finally fall into a restless sleep. It's been eating me alive, and to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure where else I can possibly turn. This whole nightmare is about my daughter, Chloe. She's 27, and she found a way to rip my heart out of my chest, which in turn led me to do something so extreme, so final that I'm still struggling to reconcile it in my own mind. One moment I feel a sense of righteous vindication, and the next I'm drowning in a sea of guilt and regret. I need to give you some background, because, with family, the past is never really the past. It always matters. Chloe is my only child from my first marriage. Her mother, Isabel, left when Chloe was just 7 years old. She ran off to Australia with a man named Martin, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces of our little girl's world. For 5 years it was just me and Chloe against the world. I won't lie to you, those 5 years were incredibly rough. I was trying to keep my family's business, Vanguard Global Imports, afloat while simultaneously raising a little girl who was deeply, profoundly wounded by her mother's abandonment. Every day felt like a battle on two fronts. Then I met my wife, Lena. She's 45 now, and she has been the steady hand in my life for 14 years. But Chloe never truly accepted her. So, about 2 months ago, Chloe called me out of the blue to tell me she was getting married. Her fiancé's name was Alec. Now, you have to understand, Chloe and I have had a tumultuous relationship over the years. Our history is a long and complicated road, filled with problems you likely wouldn't believe if I laid them all out. There have been arguments, tears, and long periods of painful silence, but when she shared her news, all of that history seemed to melt away in an instant. I was genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy for her. It felt like a ray of sunshine breaking through a sky that had been dark for far too long. Finally, something good was happening in her life. She sounded so enthusiastic about this Alex fellow, and a part of me dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, she was finally finding her footing and getting her life together. The reality of their situation, however, was that Chloe and Alex were essentially broke. She had only managed to secure a decent job in the last year, and before that, I'll be blunt, they were living off my money. I know. I can already hear the criticism. I probably enabled her for far too long, cushioned her from the real world in ways that did more harm than good. But what is a father to do? When your child struggles, you help. Their financial state meant they could afford little more than a simple courthouse wedding, a quick formality without any of the celebration. So I did what I felt any dad in my position would do. I sat them down and offered to pay for the entire wedding, everything, as my gift to them. I'm talking about the venue, the caterers, the flowers, the band, the whole works. We were looking at a $50,000 wedding. I don't say that to brag. I say it to illustrate the scale of my commitment. My business is successful, a legacy passed down through 2 generations of my family, so thankfully I could afford it. I will never forget the day we all sat down to go over the initial plan. For the first time in what felt like a decade, Chloe looked truly incandescently happy. She was practically glowing with an excitement that seemed to light up the entire room. She pulled out her phone and started showing me all these Pinterest boards and Instagram posts, a digital collage of her dream wedding. There were photos of elegant dresses, extravagant floral arrangements, and beautiful, smiling brides. For a brief, shining moment, it felt like we were finally building the kind of father-daughter relationship I had always yearned for, a bond I thought we had lost forever. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated hope. The wedding planner she chose was a top-tier professional in our area, a man known for orchestrating lavish, high-profile events. He had a full team, a portfolio that was beyond impressive, and an air of calm competence that set me at ease. Chloe dove headfirst into the process, attending countless meetings with him, poring over fabric swatches, and selecting decorations. I was content to take a back seat. I simply paid the deposits as the invoices came in and let her create her perfect day. It was her wedding after all. What do I know about floral centerpieces and color palettes? Besides, work was incredibly demanding, and I trusted her to handle the details. I remember one evening she texted me some photos of the venue she had chosen. It was a breathtakingly gorgeous place right on the shore of the lake, a sprawling estate with manicured gardens and a grand ballroom. It was everything she had ever dreamed of. I texted her back immediately, telling her how proud I was of her and how I couldn't wait for the moment I would get to walk her down the aisle. Her only reply was a single thumbs-up emoji. In hindsight, I should have seen it then. A small, cold signal that something was amiss. But I suppose I was too swept up in the emotion of it all, too desperate to believe in the fantasy of our reconciliation, to recognize the warning sign for what it was. For the next month and a half, everything seemed to be proceeding smoothly. Chloe was immersed in her wedding preparations, and I was dutifully paying the bills, which by the way seemed to be growing larger with each passing week. A chocolate fountain, an ice sculpture in the shape of a swan. It seemed excessive, but who was I to argue? I just figured we were in a good place, that this was what it took to make her happy. I even began working with my personal tailor to have a new suit made for the occasion. Lena was helping me choose the colors for my tie and pocket square. She has always been so incredibly supportive of my relationship with Chloe, a true pillar of grace, even though Chloe has treated her with nothing but thinly veiled contempt for years. But then, tiny unsettling cracks began to appear in the facade. It started when Lena's cousin, Maria, ran into one of Chloe's old friends at a local cafe. Maria, knowing how involved we were, mentioned how excited we all were for the big day. According to Maria, Chloe's friend got a strange, confused look on her face. "Oh," the friend said. "I thought she wasn't inviting them." She then added something about how Chloe had to cut out toxic family members for the sake of her mental health. Maria, completely taken aback, asked what on earth she meant by that. The friend just stammered something awkward about Chloe having a really traumatic childhood before quickly changing the subject. At the time, I brushed it off as a simple misunderstanding, a piece of gossip that got twisted in the retelling. But man, that conversation was a seed of doubt, and I should have paid much closer attention where it was planted. That small seed of doubt began to sprout, twisting into a full-blown sense of dread when my brother Robert called me. He was checking in about the wedding date, needing to book his flights and finalize his travel plans. It should have been the simplest thing in the world. I figured I would just make a quick call to the wedding planner and have Robert added to the guest list. A complete non-issue. But when I got the planner on the phone, the entire conversation felt off from the very first second. He was evasive, his professional demeanor suddenly replaced with a nervous, stilted formality. "Oh, I'm sorry, sir," he said, his voice tight, "but the guest list is finalized and has reached capacity. I will need to check directly with the bride regarding any potential changes." I felt a flash of irritation. I'm thinking, what in the hell are you talking about? I am literally the one funding this entire event, and you're telling me you need permission to add my own brother. I pushed back, trying to keep my voice even, but I could feel my patience fraying. I asked him to just email me the full guest list so I could see exactly what we were working with. That's when the man started to actively stammer, spitting out words about how he wasn't authorized to share that confidential information with anyone. That's the moment I felt a cold knot form in the pit of my stomach. I admit I lost my temper a bit. Looking back, perhaps I could have approached it with more finesse, but something felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. I told him in no uncertain terms that I was the one signing his checks, the one whose name was on every contract, and that he would either send me that list immediately, or I would be calling his boss to have a very different kind of conversation. Yes, I know how it sounds. It was a raw, unfiltered moment of frustration, but my intuition was screaming at me that I was being deliberately shut out of something. He finally caved, his resistance crumbling under the pressure. A moment later, an email landed in my inbox. I opened the attached document, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, and there it was. Or rather, there it wasn't. My name was not on the list. My wife Lena's name was not on the list. My entire side of the family erased. But that wasn't the part that felt like a physical blow. That wasn't the real knife in the gut. It was the line right there in black and white under the heading for the wedding party. Father of the bride Martin. To walk the bride down the aisle. Martin. The name echoed in the silent room. A ghost from a past I thought was long buried. The same Martin who had whispered poison in my ex-wife's ear and helped her pack her bags to abandon our 7-year-old daughter. The same Martin who, when Isabel had her own doubts, told her he wasn't ready to be a father to someone else's child. The man who had looked me directly in the face, right before they left for Australia, and said with chilling indifference, "Chloe's your problem now." In that single sickening instant, everything clicked into place. This wasn't a simple oversight. This wasn't just about me and Lena not being invited. This was a deliberate and calculated act of replacement. It was about erasing me from my own daughter's life, from her story, and from the most important day of her life. And the most twisted, Chloe had been methodically laying the groundwork for months, poisoning the well to justify it. My hands were shaking as I picked up the phone. I called my sister Sarah. I called my parents. I even called a few of our cousins. Every single one of them had heard a variation of the same narrative. She had been spinning a web of lies, telling them how I was emotionally abusive, how I was a controlling and manipulative father who never truly supported her. She was crafting this sob story about a neglectful childhood so that when she finally cut me out, no one, especially not Alex's family, would question her decision. I must have stared at that email for an hour, maybe longer. I just sat there, reading the names over and over, hoping my mind was playing tricks on me. But it was all there, undeniable and cruel. The wedding planner, probably in an attempt to cover himself, had even forwarded me the original email chain from Chloe. She had given them specific explicit instructions not to allow me or Lena anywhere near the venue. There was an entire section dedicated to security protocols, complete with our photos, to ensure we would be turned away at the door. So there I was, $50,000 deep into financing my daughter's dream wedding, only to discover I was barred from even attending. Not only that, but she was giving the honor of walking her down the aisle, my honor, to the very man who had shattered her childhood, a man who hadn't sent her so much as a birthday card in 20 years. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I handled the aftermath with grace. I didn't. I went on a bender. A bad one. The kind of bender where you start taking shots of whiskey for breakfast. Lena was beside herself with worry. She kept trying to get me to eat, bringing me plates of food that I couldn't even look at. The grief was a physical presence, stealing my appetite and leaving me hollow. I just sat in my home office day after day, staring at that godforsaken email on my computer screen and drinking myself into a stupor. During that week I must have called Chloe 50 times. Every call went straight to her voice. I left her a string of messages, each one a testament to my unraveling. They started out calm, pleading for an explanation, but as the days wore on and the silence from her end continued, they became progressively more angry, more emotional, more desperate. It's deeply embarrassing to think about now. What do you even say to your child when they betray you on such a fundamental level? The absolute worst part was watching Lena try to process it all. She has been in Chloe's life for 14 years. She helped me get my daughter through high school, through college applications, and through 2 harrowing stays in rehab. Yes, that's a whole other chapter of this story. Lena has always been Chloe's staunchest defender, standing up for her when others had long given up. And this was how Chloe chose to repay her loyalty. All the while the invoices kept coming. The wedding planner's automated system kept sending me payment reminders, flowers, catering, deposits, all that crap. Each email was a fresh slap in the face, a digital reminder that Chloe was still running around, meticulously planning her perfect day with my money, like everything was perfectly fine. She was throwing a party that I was bankrolling, but wasn't even allowed to attend. I found out later through a picture my niece posted on Instagram that Chloe was at her bachelorette party that same week. There she was, laughing and raising a champagne flute with her friends, looking happier than I had seen her in years, without a single care in the world. And where was I? I was sitting at home, having a complete and total breakdown, trying to pinpoint the exact moment where I went so wrong as a father that my own child would be capable of doing this to me. I know how it probably sounds. A 57-year-old man crying because his daughter was mean to him. It sounds pathetic, but I'm telling you, nothing in this life can prepare you for this kind of betrayal. I've had business partners stab me in the back. I've gone through a nasty, soul-crushing divorce. I've dealt with all kinds of crap in my life. But this hit differently. This was a wound of a different magnitude entirely. All I could think about were the years I had spent imagining that walk down the aisle. I thought about how I had managed to stay in her life, to be a constant presence despite all the drama, the fights, the terrifying midnight calls from police stations and emergency rooms. I thought about how I had never, not once, given up on her, even when everyone around me said I should just let her go. And now, after all of it, she was choosing Martin. That was the name that kept echoing in my head. After a week of wallowing in that miserable, alcohol-fueled haze, listening back to the voicemails I'd left her with, a sense of profound, cringing shame, something inside me shifted. The fog of despair began to clear, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I finally sobered up enough to understand that I couldn't just sit in my office and drink myself to death. I needed to see her. I needed to confront Chloe, face to face, and hear it from her own lips. Lena tried to talk me out of it. She pleaded with me, her eyes full of a deep and genuine concern that tore at my heart. She said I should wait, that I needed to calm down more, that nothing good could come from a confrontation while my emotions were still so raw. But I couldn't sit there and fester in my own home for one more second. The inaction was becoming more painful than any potential confrontation. I had to go. So I got in my car and drove over to Chloe's apartment. It's a fancy high-rise in a trendy part of the city, a place that, surprise, surprise, I helped them afford the security deposit and first few months' rent for, right up until she finally landed that new job last year. The entire drive over, I was rehearsing what I was going to say. I played the conversation over and over in my head, trying to find the right words, the right tone. I told myself to stay calm, to be the adult, to not let her see how much she was destroying me. But my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep a firm grip on the steering wheel. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I got to her building around 6 in the evening. I buzzed her apartment, and after a long pause, her voice crackled through the intercom, flat and annoyed. "Dad, I'm really busy with wedding prep right now," was all she said. She didn't even ask what I wanted. She wasn't going to buzz me in. She was treating me like some unwanted solicitor, a nuisance to be dismissed. I'm not proud of what I did next. A surge of pure, unadulterated rage shot through me, and I just lost. I started mashing all the other buzzers on the panel, one after another, until a random, irritated stranger finally let me into the building. I rode the elevator up to her floor, my blood roaring in my ears. As I approached her door, I could hear them inside. Voices rang. Chloe and Alex were arguing. A moment later, the door swung open and Alex stood there, his face a mask of extreme discomfort. He looked trapped. Over his shoulder, I could see Chloe standing in the middle of their living room, a room I had furnished for them, surrounded by a chaotic explosion of wedding magazines, sample centerpieces, and fabric swatches. She looked up at me, and the expression on her face was one of pure, unadulterated disdain, as if I were something she'd found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my own voice from shaking. I really truly tried to keep it together. I looked her right in the eye and asked her, as calmly as I could, why she hadn't told me, why she was having Martin walk her down the aisle. Her response was not what I expected. She didn't yell. She didn't deny it. A small, cruel smile played at the corners of her lips. She actually smirked at me. "Well," she said, her tone light and mocking, "at least he never replaced Mom." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was stunned into silence. What? This was the man who had literally abandoned her, who hadn't made contact in 2 decades, and I was somehow the bad guy because I had dared to remarry 5 years after being left to raise our child completely on my own. The logic was so twisted, so profoundly selfish, that I couldn't even begin to process it. Then she hit me with another gem. delivered with the same casual cruelty. "Well, now you know. Good for you," she said, shrugging as if we were discussing the weather. "Saves you the travel time and the expense. I'll send you photos if I get around to it." She said it so flippantly, like she was canceling lunch plans. Alex just stood there by the door, looking at the floor, looking anywhere but at me, just radiating an aura of someone who desperately wanted to disappear. Before I could even respond, she went on the offensive. "I had to set boundaries, Dad," she declared, her voice rising with self-righteous indignation. "You've always been so controlling. This is my wedding, and I will not let you ruin it like you've ruined everything else in my life." I thought she was just being dramatic, throwing a tantrum. But then, to my utter shock, Alex spoke up. He cleared his throat nervously and said, "Chloe told me you had some anger issues when she was younger." My head snapped toward him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "She told me you used to yell at her all the time, that you threatened to send her away if she misbehaved." He kept going, his words a clumsy recitation of a script he had been fed. He said that I never really supported her, that I just tried to control every little thing she did. I just stood there, completely stunned. My own daughter had convinced her fiancé that I was some kind of abusive monster. The narrative she had spun for my family was now the reality she had created for her future husband. I started to ask her how she could do this to me, to Lena. She cut me off with a bitter laugh. "Oh, here we go with the Lena drama again. Poor Dad and his precious Lena." She took a step closer, her eyes glittering with malice. "Did you ever stop to think that maybe I didn't want your replacement wife at my wedding?" That's when my eyes fell on the coffee table. Amidst the clutter of wedding planning, there was a silver picture frame, and in that frame was a recent photo of Chloe and Martin smiling together. They had been in contact for months. This wasn't a sudden decision. This was a long, carefully orchestrated plan. She had been using my money, my generosity, to fund a wedding where she could play happy families with the very man who had thrown her away like trash. "What did I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What did I do that was so horrible that you would choose him over me?" Her response shattered the last piece of my heart. "You're being dramatic," she spat. "This is exactly why I didn't tell you. You always make everything about your feelings. This is my wedding, my choice." She looked me up and down, that smirk returning to her face. "You're just a checkbook, just the checkbook. After 20 years of being there for every crisis, every meltdown, every rehab stay, every single late-night emergency call, that's all I was to her. A checkbook." I turned and looked at Alex, at this young man who had no idea what he was getting into. All I could muster was, "Good luck, man. You're going to need it." Then I walked out. The whole confrontation couldn't have lasted more than 15 minutes. But it felt like I had aged 15 years. I drove away from her apartment, in a complete daze. The city lights blurred into meaningless streaks of color. I had to pull over to the side of the road at one point, because I was hyperventilating, my lungs refusing to draw in enough air. My hands were shaking too violently to drive. I called Lena. She picked up on the first ring. I couldn't even form words. She just knew. She knew from the sound of my ragged breath. She came and got me, and without saying a word, she drove us to a little ice cream parlor we used to take Chloe to when she was little, after she'd had a bad day at school. Lena just sat there with me in the booth, watching me eat a chocolate sundae, letting me try not to completely fall apart right there in public. That night, sleep offered no escape. The image of Chloe's smirk, the sting of her words, they were burned into my mind. After the initial shock from the confrontation at her apartment wore off, it was replaced by a gnawing obsessive need to understand. I know it was a fool's errand, but I couldn't let it go. I had to know what I had supposedly done that was so monstrous, so unforgivable, that it warranted this level of cruelty. So the next day, I called her. I don't know why I expected a different outcome, but I truly needed to hear the answer. She actually picked up, probably by accident, and I asked her again. What did I do? It was like opening a floodgate. 20 years of what she perceived as resentment and injustice came pouring out in a torrent of furious accusations. According to Chloe, I was the worst father in history. Her primary crime. I had the audacity to remarry, to rub a stepmom in her face. She conveniently ignored the fact that I had waited 5 years after Isabel left us. 5 lonely years of being a single dad, of juggling the demands of my business with the needs of a grieving, angry child who was acting out more and more with each passing year. 5 years before I even considered dating again, let alone bringing someone new into our lives. And Lee, my wife, has been nothing but a source of unwavering kindness and stability in Chloe's life, going so far above and beyond what anyone could ever expect from a stepmother. When Chloe was a teenager and got caught with pills at her high school, an incident that nearly got her expelled, it was Lena who stayed up night after night, researching counselors and treatment programs. When Chloe's grades were so poor she was on the verge of flunking out, it was Lena who patiently spent hours at the kitchen table tutoring her, helping her salvage her semester. But in Chloe's twisted version of history, Lena was nothing more than a gold-digging interloper who had stolen her father away from her. She then brought up an incident from years ago, a time when Chloe had gone to live with my sister Sarah for a few months. After a series of particularly rough patches at home, I thought a change of scenery, a chance to be around her cousin Emily, who was the same age, might do her some good. It was a disaster. Chloe began bullying my niece, making the poor girl's life a living hell. When I finally had to intervene, Chloe was furious that I wouldn't automatically take her side, that I wouldn't defend her cruel behavior. In our phone call, she threw that back in my face, framing it as yet another instance of me choosing other people over my own daughter. She conveniently forgot all the times I did choose her, without hesitation. The time I fought like hell to keep her from being expelled over the drugs, calling in every personal and professional favor I had to my name. The time her grades were too abysmal for any decent college, and I had to pull strings with my business contacts to get her accepted into a good university. And the money. My God, the money. Does anyone have any idea how obscenely expensive a good rehab facility is? Because I do. I paid for it twice. The first time was right after college, when she fell back into her addiction with pills. The second time was just a year later. Each time I dropped everything. I liquidated savings. I maxed out credit cards. I took out personal loans from the bank. Whatever it took to get her the help she needed. For years, right up until last year, she lived in our house without ever paying a dime in rent. I paid for her car, her phone bill, her credit cards, everything. All of this, even after the screaming matches, the time she called Lena a string of horrible racist names. Yes, that happened too. My wife is Middle Eastern and Chloe said some truly vile things. The 3 a.m. crisis calls that would jolt us out of bed. I kept supporting her, because that's what a father is supposed to do, right? You don't give up on your kid. But on the phone that day, she had the absolute unmitigated nerve to tell me that I owed her this wedding, that paying $50,000 for her party was the very least I could do after ruining her life by remarrying, when I, completely astounded, reminded her that this was a gift, a massive favor. She became even more defensive. She insisted that any decent father would feel obligated to give his daughter her dream wedding. That's when I finally lost my composure. I told her she was acting like an entitled, ungrateful brat. It was a bad move. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. She started dredging up every perceived slight from the last 20 years. She accused me of abandoning her by going on business trips when she was a little girl, the very trips that paid for her private school, her clothes, her entire privileged existence. She accused me of choosing Lena over her again by defending my wife when Chloe had hurled those racist slurs at her. The phone call reached its devastating climax with one final, soul-crushing statement. She said it with a chilling coldness that I will never forget. She said she wished her mother had taken her to Australia with her instead of leaving her behind with me. And that was it. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. 20 years of trying, of fighting for her, of loving her through the darkest of times, and her ultimate wish was that she could have been with the people who had abandoned her, without a second thought. After I hung up the phone, I was completely shattered. Lena found me in my office, sitting in my chair, just openly weeping. It was the first time in our 14 years of marriage that she had ever seen me cry like that. Lena, the saint that she is, didn't try to fix it. She just came in, closed the door and sat with me in the silence, her hand resting on my shoulder. And then, For the first time I can ever recall, Lena snapped. Not at me, but at the entire impossible situation. I have never seen her truly angry, frustrated. Yes, sad. Often, but never this cold, clear anger. We need to protect ourselves, David, she said, her voice firm. This has to stop. She needs to learn that she cannot treat people like this and get away with it. Lena works with troubled kids for a living. She's a special education teacher. She looked at me and said, the behavior was classic narcissistic entitlement, that Chloe saw other people not as human beings with feelings, but as objects to be used for her own gratification. I just sat there, my gaze falling on the pile of invoices that had accumulated on my desk. They were all spread out, a testament to my foolish generosity. Venue deposit, $15,000. Catering advance, all of this money, my money, being spent to orchestrate a grand celebration of my own erasure, a party where my daughter would parade around with Martin, pretending to be one big happy family. And in that moment, sitting in my office with the echo of my daughter's words in my ear and the quiet, fierce anger of my wife beside me, something inside me just snapped. The rage and grief coalesced into a single point of cold, diamond-hard clarity. The time for tears was over. The time for indecision was over. Lena's words had given me the permission I didn't know I needed. This wasn't just about my pain anymore. It was about protecting our life, our sanity from Chloe's endless, destructive chaos. First thing the next morning, I called my bank. My voice was steady, devoid of the emotion that had ripped me apart just hours before. I explained the situation and attempted to stop the payments on all the checks I had written, to claw back the wire transfers. It was mostly a futile effort. The largest deposits, the ones for the venue and the caterers, were non-refundable and had already cleared. For a fleeting moment, the businessman in me winced at the financial loss, but the feeling vanished as quickly as it came. This was no longer about the money. The $50,000 was already a sunk cost, an expensive lesson learned. Now it was about consequences. My first real call was to the venue, the beautiful lakeside estate that Chloe had been so excited about. I explained to the manager that I was the signatory on the contract, the one who had paid the deposit, and that I wished to cancel the event scheduled for my daughter Chloe. I was prepared for an argument, for contractual obligations to be thrown in my face. Instead, the man on the other end of the line was quiet for a moment, before letting out a heavy sigh. He was surprisingly, heartbreakingly understanding. He told me he had gone through something similar with his own son, a few years back, a painful cutoff that he still didn't fully comprehend. Misery loves company, he said with a sad chuckle, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of connection with this complete stranger. Two fathers united in a club no one ever wants to join. That one act, canceling the physical space for the wedding, made it all real. There was no going back. A grim sense of purpose settled over me, and I began working my way down the list of vendors. I canceled the catering next, then the $5,000 flower order, the DJ, and the photographer. With each call I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were methodically dismantling someone else's life, not my own. I was a demolition man, and this wedding was a condemned building. The only vendor I didn't call was the wedding planner. I wanted him to remain in the dark. I wanted him to proceed as if everything was normal. I wanted Chloe to have no warning, no chance to salvage the situation or make new arrangements. Was it petty? Yes, absolutely. It was a calculated, vengeful act. But at that point, hurt and anger had burned away my better nature. I couldn't think straight. I could only think about her smirk. There was a moment, though, where I almost backed out. In the middle of the calls, my eyes landed on a framed photo on my desk. It was from Chloe's high school graduation. She's standing between me and Lena, a genuine, unguarded smile on her face, her diploma clutched in her hand. It was one of the last times I could remember seeing her look truly, uncomplicatedly happy. A wave of profound grief washed over me. This was my little girl. What was I doing? I almost picked up the phone to call the venue back, to undo what I had done, to just swallow the pain and let her have her day. But then, as clearly as if she were standing in the room, I remembered her face in her apartment. The cruel smirk when she told me about the venom in her voice when she called Lena a replacement wife. And the final, devastating verdict. You're just the checkbook. The memory was a splash of ice-cold water, extinguishing the flicker of doubt. I turned back to my list and kept going. The dress, I knew, was already paid for in full, and she had it at her apartment. I left that alone. I'm not a complete monster. Plus, it felt like the one piece of the wedding that had been hers alone, something she had picked out with her friends, a moment of joy that I had no part in, and therefore no right to destroy. The universe, it seems, has a sick sense of humor. While I was systematically erasing her wedding from existence, my email inbox was pinging with automated reminders from the wedding planner software. Upcoming deadline, final menu selection is due. One subject line read. Another chirped. It's time to choose your father-daughter dance song. Each one felt like a fresh twist of the knife in an already gaping wound. Lena sat with me through the entire ordeal. I think she knew that if she left me alone, my resolve might crumble. She just sat in the chair across from my desk, a silent, steady presence. She handled a few of the calls herself when she could see I was getting too choked up to speak. I remember hearing her firm, clear voice on the phone with the florist. No, we don't want to reschedule for a future date, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. We want to cancel completely. Throughout the whole process, my mind kept drifting to how Chloe would react when she finally found out. I'm ashamed to admit it, but a part of me wanted her to hurt as much as I was hurting. But a much bigger part of me just felt tired. So profoundly, bone-deeply tired. I was tired of the drama, tired of the fights, tired of always being cast as the villain in the story of her life, no matter how much I did for her. This wasn't even the most expensive crisis I'd ever funded for her. Both of her rehab stays cost significantly more. But this felt different. This wasn't me helping my daughter through a difficult time. This was her actively using me as a tool while simultaneously trying to inflict the deepest possible pain. After the last call was made, a heavy silence fell over the room. I just sat in my office, staring at the wall. Lena and I didn't talk much. What was there left to say? I had sabotaged my own daughter's wedding. The planner kept calling throughout the afternoon, leaving voicemails about final seating charts and timelines. I let them all go unanswered. He would find out soon enough, I figured, when he and his team showed up to a locked venue with a cancellation notice taped to the door. Is it a terrible thing to admit that a part of me was actually looking forward to the explosion, to the chaos that I knew would erupt on her wedding day? Probably. But at that point, I was so far past caring about what was right or wrong. I just wanted it to be over. The morning of the wedding arrived with a strange and heavy stillness. Lena and I sat in our kitchen, nursing cups of coffee, trying to act as if it were just a regular Saturday, but the air was thick with unspoken anticipation. It felt like we were sitting in a bunker, watching the timer on a bomb tick down to 0. We both kept glancing at our phones, which lay silent on the counter between us, waiting for the inevitable explosion. The first tremor hit around 10 o'clock in the morning. My phone buzzed, and it was my niece, Emily. Her voice was a jumble of shock and confusion. She told me the wedding planner and his entire team had arrived at the lakeside venue to begin setting up, only to be met by security guards who refused to let them on the property. The guards showed them the official cancellation paperwork. The planner, Emily said, was completely freaking out. He was pacing back and forth on the manicured lawn, screaming into his phone, calling Chloe, calling me. I ignored the incoming call, of course, calling anyone who would listen. The chaos had begun. According to Emily's play-by-play updates, Chloe herself arrived at the venue around 11. She was already in her wedding dress, her hair and makeup perfectly done, all ready for her pre-ceremony photo shoot. My niece sent me a quick, blurry photo she took from her car. She looked really pretty, the text read. That little detail somehow made the whole sordid affair feel even more tragic. When the security guard informed Chloe that her event had been canceled, she completely disintegrated. Emily said she started screaming at the guards, insisting there must be some terrible mistake, that her father had paid for everything. She tried to force her way past them, a frantic, desperate push to get through the gate. The guards had to physically block her path to keep her from trespassing. In the midst of her tirade, Emily heard her shriek, "Do you even know who my father is?" The irony was so thick, so bitter I could almost taste it. She was invoking the very father she had tried to erase. And the best part? The guest of honor, the man who was meant to take my place, Martin, never showed up. Not a call, not a text, nothing. The man who she chose to walk her down the aisle didn't even bother to come to the wedding. My niece said Chloe kept frantically calling his phone, but every call went straight to voicemail. I guess some people really never change. When Alex, the poor, unsuspecting fiancé, finally showed up, the scene escalated from chaotic to utterly surreal. Chloe, in a fit of desperation, was trying to climb over a decorative wrought iron fence to get onto the property, her expensive white dress snagging on the metal and dragging through the mud at the bottom. Alex was trying to pull her down, pleading with her to stop before she got herself arrested. The wedding planner, meanwhile, looked like he was on the verge of a full-blown cardiac event, his face pale as he talked to what I can only assume was his boss, his reputation imploding in real time. It was around this time that the guests began to arrive. A parade of 200 people, all dressed in their Saturday best, rolling up to a scene of absolute pandemonium. Cars were backed up for half a mile down the private road leading to the estate. Phones were out. People were calling Chloe, calling each other, a wave of confusion spreading through the crowd. Then the catering trucks arrived, massive vans that now had nowhere to go, and they ended up blocking the entire road, adding a traffic nightmare to the unfolding human drama. That's when Chloe finally seemed to put the pieces together. Emily said, she suddenly went quiet, a scary, unnerving quiet that cut through all the noise, and then she started to laugh. It wasn't a laugh of amusement. It was a wild, unhinged sound that made the hair on my arms stand up even hearing about it secondhand. She turned to the crowd of confused guests and screamed, "My father did this. He ruined everything." My phone began to light up, a relentless series of calls and texts from her. I didn't listen to the voicemails until much later, but when I did, they were chilling. She threatened to kill me. She threatened to kill Lena. She promised to burn our house to the ground. It was the stuff of pure, undiluted psychosis. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, she made good on part of her threat. She showed up at our house. I saw her on the security camera feed. She was still in the wedding dress, which was now completely ruined, torn and stained with mud. Mascara ran in black rivers down her face. She couldn't get through the main gate, however, because I had deactivated her access code the day before. Enraged, she just laid on the horn of her car, a single, continuous blaring note that echoed through our quiet neighborhood for what felt like an eternity. Our neighbors, understandably, called the police. By the time the officers arrived, she was out of her car, picking up landscaping rocks from our flower beds and hurling them at our security cameras, all while screaming about how I had ruined her life. The officers had to physically restrain her and drag her away. Alex stood by her car, looking like he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. I watched the entire spectacle unfold on my monitor in the office. Lena was standing behind me, her hands on my shoulders, begging me to stop watching, to turn it off. But I couldn't. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. That was my daughter out there, my little girl, having a complete mental breakdown in a muddy wedding dress for the whole world to see. It was without a doubt the worst day of my life. And the whole time, a single thought kept running through my head. This wasn't what I wanted. Yes, I wanted to teach her a lesson. I wanted her to feel a consequence for her cruelty, but watching her completely fall apart like that was rough. It was really truly rough. Later that evening, the wedding planner called me one last time, babbling about final payments and damages to his reputation. I told him to take it up with Chloe and hung up the phone. I was so far past caring at that point. I found out later, through Emily, that a small group of guests had gone back to Chloe and Alex's tiny apartment. They had an impromptu reception with a grocery store sheet cake and some cheap champagne. Real depressing stuff, apparently. A sad, pathetic end to a day of utter disaster. The days that followed the wedding, were intense. It felt like living in the radioactive fallout zone of a nuclear explosion. The silence from Chloe was absolute, but the shockwaves from her meltdown rippled out, touching every corner of our lives. The first wave hit the very next morning. My parents showed up at our house unannounced. They're in their 70s and had driven 3 hours to get to us, a journey that isn't easy for them anymore. My mother was furious. The moment she stepped out of the car, she started in on me, her voice trembling with righteous anger. She went on and on about how you never ever turn your back on family, about what kind of father intentionally ruins his own daughter's wedding day. My dad, as usual, was silent. He just sat in our living room, looking at me with an expression of profound disappointment that honestly felt 1,000 times worse than my mother's yelling. I tried to explain, laid out the whole sordid story about Martin, about being uninvited and barred by security, about Chloe's lies and the calculated cruelty of it all. But my mother wasn't having any of it. She waved her hand dismissively, as if these were just minor details. "She's just confused, David," she kept saying. "She's your daughter. You're the parent. You need to be the bigger person here." It was easy for her to say. Around her grandparents, Chloe had always been an absolute angel, sweetness, and light. They had never seen the other side. Then they dropped the bomb, the ultimate act of parental betrayal. They told me they had decided to pay for a new wedding for Chloe. They were going to cover the entire cost themselves, so she could reschedule everything and still have her dream day. My own parents, siding with her, going behind my back to completely invalidate my decision and reward her behavior. That blow hurt almost as much as Chloe's own actions. It truly deeply hurt. But Chloe, in her infinite capacity for self-destruction, managed to make it even worse. When my parents went to her apartment later that day to deliver their generous, misguided offer, she completely lost it on them. She started screaming at them, accusing them of taking my side, of betraying her just like everyone else. And then she said something so vile, so disconnected from reality, that it finally shattered the perfect granddaughter illusion my parents had cherished for years. She blamed them for her drug problems. She shrieked that they were the ones who had exposed her back in high school, that they had ruined her life. It was utter nonsense, of course. It was her chemistry teacher who had found the pills and called me. My parents had no idea, until long after the fact. She told them, and I'm quoting my mother's tearful account to me later that night, to get the hell out and never come back. She screamed this at my 75-year-old mother, a woman with a serious heart condition, who had spent countless summers spoiling Chloe rot, and that was the moment they finally saw it. That was when they finally understood what I had been dealing with all these years. My mom called me that night sobbing into the phone. She kept apologizing, saying she was so sorry for not believing me, for not understanding. "I couldn't even recognize the woman who was screaming at me," she cried. "That angry person, that's not our Chloe." "Yeah, Mom," I said, my own voice thick with a sorrowful mix of vindication and grief. "I know." After that, the family civil war officially began. My sister, Sarah, the one Chloe had lived with and terrorized during high school, backed me up completely. She had seen firsthand how manipulative and cruel Chloe could be, but my brother, Robert, thought I had gone too far, that there had to have been a better way. It has driven a wedge between us, creating a tense silence that will make this year's Thanksgiving a real joy. Let me tell you. Then there was Lena's family. They had never been particularly fond of Chloe, for obvious reasons, but they had always tried to remain polite and neutral for my sake. After this, though, they were done. Lena's mother called, and while my Arabic isn't perfect, I'm pretty sure the words she used to describe Chloe are not ones you'd find in a dictionary. The fallout continued to spread. My friends were some understood completely, while others looked at me with a new weariness. My business partners started treating me differently, a subtle shift in their demeanor that suggested they were questioning my stability. I was quietly and politely removed from the board of directors at the Oakwood Reserve, our local country club. I guess a man who publicly sabotages his own daughter's wedding isn't a good look for their brand, even if she deserved it. The worst part was the smear campaign Chloe launched. I found out she was telling anyone who would listen that the real reason I canceled the wedding was because I'm a racist and didn't approve of Alex's family. This was, of course, patently absurd. My wife is literally Middle Eastern, and Alex's family are just regular, friendly white people from Indiana. But a lie like that is toxic, and it spreads fast. The story got around. I lost a couple of long-standing contracts over it. My secretary of 15 years quit without giving a reason. Reading these fabricated stories about myself online, watching my professional reputation get systematically dismantled, was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. And through it all, a nagging voice in the back of my head whispered on a loop, "You did this. You're the adult here. You should have been better. You should have just endured it." Most nights, I couldn't sleep. I would just lie there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had gone too far, if I should have just sucked it up and paid for the wedding, playing the part of the good, supportive dad. But then, whenever the guilt became too much to bear, I would remember her standing in my parents' living room. I would remember her making my sweet elderly mother cry. I would remember her screaming at the two people who had shown her nothing but unconditional love her entire life. And just like that, the guilt would recede, and I wouldn't feel so bad anymore. Lena has been my rock through all of this, the unwavering anchor in the storm. Her strength has held me together. One evening, she came into my office and found me just staring at a folder of old baby pictures of Chloe. Photos from a time when our lives were simple, when her biggest problem was a scraped knee. Lena didn't say anything. She didn't try to offer platitude. She just pulled up a chair and sat with me in the quiet, her presence a comforting weight in the darkness. I know she's been hurting just as much as I have, but she's been trying to stay strong for my sake, burying her own pain to help me carry mine. I found out, not through any direct communication, but through the modern-day grapevine of my niece's Instagram, that Chloe and Alex had a small wedding about a month after the disaster I caused. It was just a handful of friends, maybe 20 people, at a casual backyard barbecue. A part of me was relieved, I suppose, that they had managed to get married, but it was a hollow feeling, and in a final fitting twist, Martin didn't bother to show up for that one either. Some saviors turn out to be ghosts after all. In the months that followed, life settled into a new, fragile kind of normal. Lena and I tried our best to move on. I threw myself into my work at Vanguard Global Imports, working 12-hour days, losing myself in shipping manifests and international trade agreements. It was a welcome distraction, a way to silence the relentless loop of regret and anger in my head. And for a while it worked. I was actually starting to feel okay about everything, as if the wounds were finally beginning to scar over. Then last week, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. A man's hesitant voice on the other end said, "My name." It was Alex. My heart immediately seized in my chest, a jolt of pure adrenaline and fear. My first thought was that something terrible had happened to Chloe, that this was the dreaded call every parent fears. But it wasn't that. It was something far more complicated, and in many ways, far more messed up than I could have ever imagined. He wanted to meet for dinner. He was incredibly cagey over the phone, refusing to tell me why. He just kept repeating that he needed to talk to me in person, that it was important. My better judgment screamed at me to tell him to get lost, to leave me out of whatever new drama was brewing. But my curiosity, that powerful and often foolish human impulse, got the better of me. I had to know. I told Lena I was meeting him, and she was not happy about it. The worry was plain on her face. "What good can come of this, David?" she asked, and I didn't have a good answer for her. I went to a quiet bar downtown, a neutral territory, my stomach churning with a mixture of dread and anticipation. When Alex walked in, I barely recognized him. He looked tired, broken, and years older than he had the last time I saw him. What he told me next completely floored me. Holy cow! It turns out that Chloe and Alex had separated 3 months ago, just a few short months after their small backyard wedding. The reason? He said, she had been absolutely terrorizing him. He described a pattern of escalating abuse, throwing plates and glasses at him during arguments, systematically breaking his prized possessions, screaming at him for hours on end over the smallest perceived slight. It was all chillingly, horribly familiar. According to Alex, She completely lost it after they moved to a new city for a major promotion he'd received. Even though she had found a job there with a similar salary, she became convinced he had done it to deliberately isolate her from her friends. She grew paranoid and possessive, constantly accusing him of betraying her. Then, he looked me straight in the eye and he apologized. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice cracking. He told me he saw how Chloe had treated me and Lena before the wedding. The coldness, the disrespect, but he hadn't said anything. He admitted she had manipulated him into believing that we were the villains, that we deserved every bit of her cruelty. "She love-bombed me," he said, using a term I'd never heard before. He described how she was incredibly sweet, fun, and charming at the beginning of their relationship, but that after they moved in together, she began to slowly reveal her real self. By the time the wedding drama exploded, he was already constantly walking on eggshells, terrified of triggering her next rage. He told me she even threw a massive fit because he wanted to invite his own sister to their small backyard wedding. She had accused his sister of trying to take over everything, the exact same accusation she had always leveled against Lena. Hearing him say it, hearing my own painful history echoed in his story, was both a vindication and a profound sorrow. He was there, he said, to ask for my help. He wanted me to help him get Chloe into therapy. He said she had been spiraling since their separation, calling him 50 times a day, showing up unannounced at his new apartment, and at his workplace. He said he still cared about her, that he was genuinely worried for her, but that he couldn't take the abuse anymore. I didn't know what to say. Part of me, the bitter, wounded part, wanted to look at him and say, "Welcome to my last 20 years, son." But he looked so genuinely broken, so lost. He reminded me of myself at his age, full of a desperate hope that the person you love can still be saved. So against Lena's tearful protests and my own better judgment, I went to see her. I went alone. It was a bad decision, but I couldn't bear the thought of exposing Lena to Chloe's poison again. Chloe's apartment was a disaster, a concerning, shocking level of mess that spoke of a deep depression. The moment she saw me standing in her doorway, she started screaming. She called me every name in the book. She blamed me for Alex leaving her. She blamed me for her mother leaving her. She blamed me for every single thing that had ever gone wrong in her life. I tried to stay calm. I told her she needed help, that we could talk about all of her anger, but that she needed to see a therapist first. She just laughed, that same unhinged laugh I'd heard about from the wedding day. Then her face went cold, and she said something that chilled me to the bone. "I hate Lena so much," she said, her voice a low, venomous hiss, "that I want to kill her." It wasn't just casual, angry hyperbole. The look in her eyes, it was a look of pure, empty hatred that scared the hell out of me. I left pretty quickly after that. I called Alex from the safety of my car. I told him I had tried, but there was nothing more I could do. She was too far gone. But I couldn't just give up on her completely. I couldn't just walk away and leave her to drown in her own rage. As I drove away from her apartment, the chilling threat she had made against Lena echoing in my ears, I knew that I could no longer be a part of her life, not directly. But there was one last desperate, long-shot idea I had. I reached out to Chloe's old best friend from high school, a woman named Olivia. Their families were our neighbors back then, and the girls had been inseparable for years. Olivia was a kind, stable, intelligent person, and I always felt she was a good influence on Chloe. She lives in New Zealand now, but I knew from my sister that she and Chloe had managed to keep in touch over the years, albeit sporadically. It felt like a Hail Mary pass, but she was the only person left who had known the Chloe from before, the girl buried deep beneath all the anger and hate. I called her and laid out the whole story, my voice cracking with the strain of it all. I asked her if she would be willing to try talking to Chloe, to plead with her to get professional help. To my immense surprise, it worked. Olivia, a true friend in every sense of the word, got through to her in a way that I, her father, no longer could. A few days later, I received a short, stilted text from Chloe. She said she had agreed to start therapy. She even, in a moment of what I can only hope was genuine remorse, called my parents and apologized for her horrific behavior. It was a breakthrough, a tiny glimmer of light in an overwhelmingly dark tunnel. Though she made sure to add in her text to me, She would never forgive me or Lena for what we had done. I don't know what happens next. The future is a fog. Maybe with enough time and professional help, the daughter I raised might find her way back. I have to believe she is still in there somewhere, buried deep beneath the layers of trauma and bitterness. But I have finally painfully come to accept that I cannot be the one to save her anymore. I have to let her go. I had to learn that lesson the hard way, at a cost that I am still struggling to comprehend. I just wanted to update you all. To the strangers who have read this story, thank you for listening. Your support over this past year, and especially the stories shared by other parents who have walked this same impossible road, has helped me feel less alone in all of this. It has been a lifelong. I guess if there's a moral to this whole devastating saga, it's this. Sometimes you can love someone with all of your heart, you can dedicate your life to them, and you can still have to let them go, for their sake, and for your own. It hurts though. God, it hurts. Thank you for joining me on that incredibly intense and emotional journey. David's story is a harrowing exploration of a parent's ultimate breaking point. It serves as a powerful and painful reminder that unconditional love cannot always survive relentless betrayal. The key lesson here isn't simply about revenge, it's about the gut-wrenching necessity of self-preservation. For 20 years, this father absorbed every crisis and paid every bill, holding on to the hope of connection, only to be deliberately erased and told he was nothing more than a checkbook. His final decision, while shocking, was the last resort of a man realizing that continuing to enable such toxic behavior was not an act of love but a slow destruction of his own spirit. It teaches us that setting a definitive boundary, no matter how earth-shattering it may feel, is sometimes the only way to reclaim your dignity and peace. It's the heartbreaking acknowledgement that you can love someone with every fiber of your being and still have to let them go to save yourself. Stories like this are so important because they explore the messy, complicated realities of human relationships. If this narrative resonated with you, and you want to support the telling of more stories like it, please take a moment to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is what makes this community possible. It's amazing how these experiences connect us all. I would love to see where this story has reached, so please comment below and let me know which country or region you're watching from today. Thank you for listening.